All right. Hello, I'm Peter Cook with the North Berrien Historical Museum. Welcome to our tour of a couple cemeteries in Bainbridge Township. There are a total of 10 cemeteries in Bainbridge Township, and to cover them all would be a whole video series unto them itself. So we're doing just a couple today, and we're starting with St. Paul's Cemetery, which is located on the southwest corner of Hill Road and Bainbridge Center Road. It's just north of St. Paul's Church. And the cemetery was established in 1850 when Peter and Elizabeth Smithberger sold the land to the church for the price of $1. And strangely, the couple were buried in New Hope Cemetery just down the road. That's actually going to be our next stop on this tour. In the early 1900s, St. Paul's Cemetery was known as Lutheran Cemetery, and it's now maintained and mowed by St. Paul's Church. Still used for burials to this day. You'll see a combination of new and old headstones here. And it's actually the second oldest cemetery in Bainbridge Township, the oldest being Canibus Cemetery on Friday Road. There are more than 50 families related to the community found here. You'll see familiar names like Buyak, Heiler, Molzer, and Mosier. The oldest grave belongs to Christian Krieger, dating 1853, and that's actually going to be our first stop on the tour, so let's get started. So here lies Christian Krieger, who was born in 1783 in Western Germany. And before we get into Christian's story, I'll just note that on the headstone, there is some symbolism. There is an open Bible, which is symbolism to denote faith. The epitaph reads, "Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord." And that is from the book of Revelation. And it follows in Revelation that the person is blessed indeed, for now they can rest from their work and good deeds will follow. So Christian, as I mentioned, was born in Western Germany. That's where many families came from that settled in Bainbridge. The reason for that was that there was a big lumber firm from New York who owned a lot of the land here called Smith & Merrick, and they placed ads in German newspapers for good, cheap farmland in Berrien County, right here in Bainbridge. A lot of people jumped on that opportunity and moved from Germany, so there's a heavy German settlement in Bainbridge. Krieger, by trade, was a nail maker in Germany, and his family was one of the original 6 families who came over here. He came with his 2 brothers and oldest son to Bainbridge in about 1841. When they first arrived in Bainbridge, they wore the wooden shoes they had worn in Germany, but they soon adapted to American ways. And Christian bought forest land in Bainbridge and settled down with his family to clear it and farm the land. They farmed wheat, corn, potatoes, oats, rye. They had a goat for milk as well as cheese. As Christian could afford it, he brought over his 6 sons, a process which took 14 years. And as their sons made their way over, they had enough money to get to the United States, but then some of them faced hardships to actually reach Michigan. One of those was Christian's son, Adam, who's also buried here a few paces away. We're going to go and talk a little bit about Adam and his family now. All right, so here we are with Adam Krieger and his wife, Elizabeth. Adam was one of Christian's sons, and when he arrived in New York City, he did not have enough money to find his way to Berrien County. So he had to work in a lime mine for a month, saved up, and was then able to afford to come to Michigan. Adam was born in 1832, and he and his wife Elizabeth lived on a farm in Bainbridge on Angling Road. And that's just a little bit of information on the Krieger family. All right, so we are now visiting with the Schmidts, Christian and Margaretha Schmidt. Christian was born in 1792 in Germany and married Margaretha Mosier in 1813. 11 children were born to the couple, and they were farmers. They received permission to immigrate to the United States on February 27th, 1852. The reason that they wanted to immigrate is that the family were not making much of a living farming in Germany. They were working partly from day labor and partly from the harvest of their small farmland. and conditions had become so sad that they could not win sufficient income in their home country. And so they moved here and worked a family farm and began to buy land of their own and prospered. And both Christian and Margaretha are buried in St. Paul's Cemetery. Originally, no stone marked their graves, and the family planted pine trees for both of the parents, as well as one child who had died about the same time. And we're standing right underneath one right now. They're all three of them are at the front of the cemetery, but there is now a new headstone for Christian and Margaretha. And the sons changed the spelling of their name to Smith. So that's where a lot of the Smiths from the area come from. Our last stop in St. Paul's Cemetery is with the Lull family, Carl and Caroline Lull, both born in Germany in the early 1850s, and they were living in northeast Germany in the late 1800s. At the time, there was great unrest in Eastern Europe, and their family was very poor. Due to the Russian invasions, men over the age of 18 were required to serve at least 2 years in the German army. Carl, in his 30s at the time, became a German military horse groomer and gave lessons to officers' wives on horseback riding. Carl did not enjoy his time in the service and did not want his oldest to have to serve. But a poor country meant that he was really worried about his family, and he heard from friends and family that the streets of the United States were paved in gold. And in 1890, the family borrowed $700 to purchase a voyage to America. So Carl and Caroline brought their 7 children over by boat. There were very poor travel conditions and bad weather, and they had to sail in the steerage down in the hold of the ship. But they eventually found their way to Benton Harbor, Michigan, and settled in an area known as the Flats, which was primarily Jewish. It was not in the German settlement here in Bainbridge. And Carl worked at a brickyard, and every day he would wheel a wheelbarrow to work, and then at the end of the shift would wheel it back home full of bricks, one piece at a time. And on November 14th, 1891, the Lulls built a new house on Market Street in 9th on land that they had purchased for $50. And the children and Caroline worked on nearby farms picking fruit to save money. And exactly 4 years later, on November 14th, 1895, all their money saved up, the Lulls purchased a 60-acre farm for the cost of $2,700. And this was located 1.5 miles east of Millburg on Territorial Road, now in the German settlement. And a family legend goes that Caroline took only 1 day off that year from picking strawberries to give birth to their son Edward on May 10th. It was an early strawberry season that year. And that's just a little bit of information on the Lulls, and that's all we're going to talk about for St. Paul's Cemetery today. And we're going to go right on down the road to New Hope Cemetery. All right, we have a little sprinkle going on here, but we're not going to let that stop us. We're now at New Hope Cemetery on the corner of North Bainbridge Center Road and North Branch Road. And New Hope used to be known as the Zion Evangelical Cemetery in the early 1900s for the church that resided here. It was then associated with the New Hope United Methodist Church until the church building burned down in 1983. On November 19th of that year, the cemetery was sold to Bainbridge Township for the sum of $1. And it is maintained by Bainbridge Township. You'll see a lot of familiar names from the area in this small cemetery. Canibus, Nichols, Weber, Arndt, Wenzel, Gottfried, and Ernestine Wenzel, who immigrated here in 1904, are found in this cemetery. And we're going to just focus on a couple families. So let's get headed into the cemetery. So we're visiting here with the Friday family. David and Catherine Friday are buried on this side that I'm standing on, both born in Germany in the early 1800s. They were originally the Freitags, and the Freitag family came to America in 1846 from Germany as newlyweds and traveled with Nicholas and Katrina Kibler, relatives of theirs. David was a wagon maker by trade and made the first wagon in Bainbridge Township. And the Fridays enjoyed cheese and made lots of it. And Friday Road was once called Cheese Street by the locals. Now, David and Catherine had a son, Jacob, who's buried on the other side of the Friday family headstone, along with his wife, Elizabeth Butzbach Friday. And Jacob had the first Holstein cattle in the area on his farm, and he imported 3 cows from the Netherlands for $1,500 in 1886, which would be nearly $40,000 today. And 1 cow gave 80 pounds of milk daily. Wow. Jacob entered them in the county fair in Benton Harbor that same year, 1886, and while at the fair, Jacob suffered a heart attack and died at the age of 31. And he was survived by his widow Elizabeth and their 5 children. And Elizabeth had a brother named Philip Butzbach Jr., who stayed on the farm to help her until the children were old enough to help. And of course, the Friday family, very well known for their farming, their fruit growing. Many people remember Farmer Fridays. And so that's a little bit of information on the history of the Friday family. So this is going to be our last stop in New Hope Cemetery and on our tour of Bainbridge Cemeteries. This is the headstone of Anna Gauman, born Anna Dukeshire. And her husband, Carl, moved from Ontario to Detroit at a young age and started working for a company that was just starting out building cars. Wonder what company that could be. Carl was such a good typist, and he was also good at taking shorthand, so Henry Ford asked Carl to be his secretary, which Carl did for a few years. Now, Carl's brother was a traveling knife salesman at the time and was selling knives in Bainbridge when he fell in love and married Minnie Dukeshire. At the wedding, Carl met Anna and fell in love with her, and they got engaged. He would come by train to see her in Benton Harbor every chance that he got. After Carl and Anna attended the Moody Bible Institute in Chicago, in 1911 they sailed for China to work as missionaries, and they were assigned to the province of Yunnan, which is in the southwest corner of China. The Lisu tribe, who they were working with, didn't have a written language, so Carl and Anna had to learn their language and then make up a written language. They also built schools for teaching and reading. After 10 years in China, they came back to visit, and Carl visited his old boss, Henry Ford. The business, as you may imagine, was going very well, and Henry Ford gave Carl a good amount of stock in the company. Every month, Carl received a nice check from Ford. The Gaumans returned to China and had a few children. Unfortunately, Carl became sick a few years later and passed away. Anna had 1 daughter and 2 sons to care for and stayed in China for a couple more years before it became too dangerous and she was sent back. She then lived in Bainbridge with her parents while her children finished school at Waterville High School. She then moved to Chicago and started a rooming house business. Anna died at the age of 93 and wanted to be buried next to her parents, August and Lydia Dukeshire, in the area that she was born. So that's Anna Gauman, and that is it for our tour of a couple of cemeteries in Bainbridge Township. Thank you very much for tuning in. Check out our other videos that are also available, other cemeteries in the area. I'm Peter Cook with the North Berrien Historical Museum. Goodbye.